Every morning at exactly 8:15, a small girl with dark braids would slip through the revolving doors of Meridian Financial Tower. She'd find the same worn leather chair in the corner of the marble lobby, pull out a tattered book, and sit in perfect silence for hours. Security guards tried asking her questions, but she'd just smile politely and continue reading. The receptionist offered her water, cookies, even called social services twice. But the little girl always had the same response. She was waiting for someone. What they didn't know was that this 9-year-old held the key to a mystery that would shake the 42nd floor executive suite to its core. And when CEO Elias Ford finally discovered her secret, it would force him to confront a decision that haunted him every single day. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Maya Singh had been coming to the lobby for 3 weeks straight, and each day she brought the same dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web, the same small backpack with carefully packed snacks, and the same quiet determination that seemed far too mature for her 9 years. She would arrive precisely when the morning rush began, navigating through the sea of suits and briefcases with the practiced ease of someone who had memorized every marble tile pattern on the floor. Her presence had become as predictable as the coffee cart vendor who set up outside at 7:30 each morning, yet infinitely more mysterious. The security team at Meridian Financial had dealt with their share of unusual visitors over the years. There had been protesters with megaphones, disgruntled former employees seeking revenge, and overzealous salespeople who refused to take no for an answer. But Maya Singh was different. She never caused trouble, never raised her voice, never even seemed to notice the curious stares she attracted from the steady stream of executives, accountants, and administrative staff who passed through the lobby daily. She would simply sit in her chosen corner, occasionally turning a page in her book, occasionally glancing toward the bank of elevators that carried important people to important meetings 40 floors above her head. The building itself was a monument to success and ambition, its glass and steel facade rising into the sky like a gleaming spear thrust toward heaven. Inside, the lobby stretched across nearly 3,000 square feet of polished marble, with soaring ceilings supported by columns that had been imported from Italy at a cost of $200,000 each. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across leather seating areas where visiting clients could wait in comfort, while abstract sculptures worth more than most people's homes served as conversation pieces for the wealthy and powerful who conducted business within these walls. Maya seemed oblivious to the opulence surrounding her, focused entirely on her vigil and her book. She had chosen her corner carefully, positioning herself where she could observe both the main entrance and the elevator banks without drawing attention from the constant flow of traffic. From her vantage point, she could see everyone who entered the building, every delivery person who brought packages, every important-looking individual who might hold the key to solving her family's desperate situation. Marcus Webb, the head of security, had been watching her with growing concern. A former police officer with 22 years of experience walking beats in some of the city's most challenging neighborhoods, he had developed an instinct for trouble. And something about this situation felt wrong. Not dangerous wrong, but sad wrong. The kind of wrong that kept him awake at night wondering if he should have done more. He had approached Maya several times, crouching down to her eye level and speaking in the gentle tone he used with his own grandchildren, asking if she was lost, if she needed help finding her parents, if there was someone he could call. Each time, Maya would look up from her book with those impossibly serious dark eyes and give him the same answer. She was waiting for someone, and she would know when they arrived. Marcus had served in the military before joining the police force, had seen combat in Afghanistan where he learned to recognize the look of someone carrying invisible wounds. Maya had that same look, the expression of someone who had experienced trauma beyond her years and was struggling to process it alone. It worried him more than he cared to admit. This small girl, with her patient dignity and her obvious intelligence, sitting day after day in a corporate lobby as if her life depended on it. On the 15th day of Maya's visits, Marcus decided to take a different approach. Instead of questioning her directly, he positioned himself at the security desk where he could observe her more carefully through the bank of monitors that covered every angle of the building's public spaces. He noticed that she always chose the same chair, always faced the same direction, always seemed to be listening for something specific. When the elevator bells chimed, she would look up hopefully, scanning the faces of the people who emerged. When delivery trucks arrived, she would crane her neck to see through the glass doors. When the building's PA system crackled to life with routine announcements, she would stop reading entirely and focus on every word. The pattern suggested that Maya was indeed waiting for someone specific, but Marcus couldn't figure out who that might be. He had reviewed the building's employee database, cross-referencing names and photos with Maya's appearance, to see if she might be related to any current staff members. He had checked recent terminations, thinking she might be the child of someone who had been laid off and was seeking reinstatement. He had even looked into the building's vendor lists, wondering if her connection might be through one of the many service providers who worked in the tower. Nothing had yielded any clues, and Maya herself remained frustratingly vague about the details of her mission. She would acknowledge that she was waiting for someone, would confirm that this someone worked in the building, but would provide no additional information that might help Marcus understand the situation or provide appropriate assistance. Her reticence wasn't born of mistrust or fear, he realized, but rather of a child's incomplete understanding of adult complexities, combined with a determination to handle her burden alone. The receptionist, a kind woman named Patricia who had worked at Meridian for 12 years, had also taken notice of their unusual daily visitor. Patricia had 3 children of her own and recognized the signs of a child carrying too much weight on small shoulders. She began keeping a small stash of granola bars and juice boxes in her desk drawer, offerings that Maya would accept with polite gratitude but never enthusiasm. Patricia tried engaging her in conversation about school, about her favorite books, about whether she lived nearby, but Maya's responses were always brief and carefully neutral. She was in 4th grade, she liked to read, and she lived close enough to walk to the building each morning. What Patricia found most heartbreaking was Maya's patience. Children weren't supposed to sit still for hours without complaint, weren't supposed to handle disappointment with such quiet resignation. Every day, Maya would maintain her vigil until exactly 4:30 in the afternoon, at which point she would carefully pack her book and snacks, thank Patricia for any kindness shown, and walk back through those revolving doors into the bustling city beyond. The ritual never varied, the timing never changed, the polite gratitude never faltered, even though whatever Maya was hoping for clearly never materialized. Patricia had followed her once, staying far enough behind to avoid being noticed, and watched as Maya boarded a city bus that headed toward the less affluent neighborhoods on the east side of town. The bus ride took nearly 40 minutes, which meant Maya was spending close to 2 hours each day just traveling to and from the building. The dedication required for such a commitment spoke to the desperate importance of whatever had brought her to Meridian Financial in the first place. During her lunch breaks, Patricia found herself researching resources for children in crisis, looking for organizations that might be able to help Maya even if the girl herself wouldn't explain what kind of help she needed. She printed out information about food banks, after-school programs, counseling services, and financial assistance programs, keeping the materials in her desk drawer alongside the snacks she provided. She hoped that eventually Maya would trust her enough to accept more substantial help, but she was prepared to wait as long as necessary. The other employees in the building had begun to notice Maya as well, though their reactions varied widely. Some of the younger staff members found her presence charming, occasionally stopping to chat about her book or compliment her on her neat appearance. Others seemed annoyed by what they perceived as a security lapse, wondering aloud why a child was allowed to loiter in a professional environment. A few of the more senior executives had mentioned Maya to their assistants, asking whether she might represent some kind of liability issue for the company. It was this last concern that eventually brought Maya's situation to the attention of the building's management company, which in turn raised questions with Meridian Financial about the appropriateness of allowing an unaccompanied minor to spend extended periods in their lobby. The legal department had been consulted, risk assessments had been conducted, and policy memos had been circulated, all focused on the question of whether Maya's presence represented a problem that needed to be solved through official channels. The mystery of Maya Singh might have continued indefinitely, lost in the bureaucratic machinery of corporate risk management, if not for a chance encounter on a rainy Thursday morning in her fourth week of visits. Elias Ford, the CEO of Meridian Financial, had arrived at the office earlier than usual to prepare for a board meeting that would determine the fate of several major acquisitions. The meeting would be crucial for the company's expansion plans, involving potential deals worth over $600 million and affecting the employment of thousands of workers across multiple states. At 52 years old, Elias had built his reputation on decisive action and unwavering focus, qualities that had transformed Meridian from a regional investment firm into a national powerhouse with over 3,000 employees and assets exceeding $8 billion. His rise to the top had been meteoric, but not without cost, requiring sacrifices that had left him wealthy beyond imagination, but increasingly isolated from the human consequences of the decisions he made in boardrooms and conference calls. Elias rarely spent time in the lobby of his own building. His executive assistant usually coordinated his arrivals to minimize time spent in public spaces, whisking him from his private parking garage to his corner office via a dedicated elevator that bypassed the main floors entirely. The arrangement allowed him to maintain the kind of focused efficiency that had made him successful, avoiding the distractions and interruptions that could derail important trains of thought or compromise sensitive business discussions. But this particular morning, his assistant had called in sick with the flu that had been circulating through the office, and a problem with the executive elevator had forced him to take the same route as everyone else. As he strode across the marble lobby, his attention focused on the quarterly reports loaded on his tablet, he nearly collided with Maya as she made her way to her usual chair. The brief contact was hardly more than a brush of shoulders, but it was enough to make Elias look up from his screen and notice the small girl with the serious expression and the worn backpack. Something about her struck him as familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. The feeling nagged at him as he continued toward the elevators, a persistent itch of recognition that he couldn't quite scratch. Maya, for her part, had looked up at the tall man with silver hair and expensive clothes, studying his face with the same intensity she brought to everything else. There was something about him that seemed important, something that made her think he might be the kind of person who could help, but she had learned not to approach strangers directly. Instead, she filed away the encounter in her memory and returned her attention to her book, though she found it harder than usual to concentrate on Charlotte's adventures in the barn. The thought of the girl stayed with Elias throughout his morning meetings, a persistent distraction that he found increasingly annoying. Elias Ford had not built his empire by allowing his attention to wander toward irrelevant concerns, yet he found himself wondering about the girl in the lobby, about her purpose and her story. During a brief break between presentations about market volatility and regulatory challenges, he found himself looking out his office window toward the street below, wondering if she was still there, still waiting for whatever or whoever had brought her to his building. The board meeting that afternoon was particularly intense, with heated discussions about the wisdom of expanding into new markets during uncertain economic times. Several board members expressed concerns about the company's recent cost-cutting measures, wondering whether the layoffs and benefit reductions that had improved their profit margins might have damaged employee morale. Public perception. Elias found himself defending decisions he had made months earlier, explaining the necessity of difficult choices in competitive markets, but the arguments felt hollow in a way they never had before. As the meeting dragged on into the evening, Elias's thoughts kept returning to the girl in the lobby. There was something about her patient dignity that reminded him of his own daughter at that age, back when his marriage was still intact and his family still believed that success in business was worth the sacrifices it required. His daughter was grown now, living on the opposite coast and speaking to him only on holidays and birthdays. Their relationship another casualty of his single-minded pursuit of professional achievement. When the board meeting finally ended near 7 o'clock, Elias made an impulsive decision to stop by the lobby before heading home to his empty penthouse apartment. He expected to find the space deserted, except for the night security staff. But as the elevator doors opened, he was surprised to see Maya still sitting in her quarter chair, her book closed now, her small hands folded in her lap as she stared toward the darkened windows that faced the street. The sight stopped him in his tracks. It was well past the time when Maya usually left the building, well past the time when any child should be alone in a corporate lobby. She looked smaller somehow in the evening light, more vulnerable, and Elias felt a surge of concern that surprised him with its intensity. Without fully understanding why, he found himself walking toward her corner of the lobby, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet space. During a brief break between presentations, he called down to security and asked Marcus Webb to come to his office for a quick conversation. Marcus had been expecting this call for days. In his experience, unusual situations in corporate buildings eventually worked their way up the chain of command, and the daily presence of an unaccompanied minor was definitely unusual. He rode the elevator to the 42nd floor with a mixture of professional resignation and personal concern, hoping that whatever action the CEO decided to take would be in Maya's best interest. The executive floor of Meridian Financial was a testament to wealth and power, with thick carpeting that muffled sound, artwork that had been featured in museum exhibitions, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of the city in all directions. The hallway leading to Elias Ford's office was lined with photographs documenting the company's growth over the past 15 years, showing ribbon-cutting ceremonies, award presentations, and handshake deals that had shaped the financial landscape of the region. Elias Ford's corner office was the crown jewel of this impressive space, spanning nearly 800 square feet and featuring a private conference room, a fully stocked bar, and a mahogany desk that had been custom-built by craftsmen in North Carolina at a cost of $35,000. The walls were adorned with original paintings by renowned artists, while the shelves displayed awards, signed baseballs, and other tokens of success and influence. It was a room designed to intimidate and impress, to remind visitors of the power and resources commanded by the man who occupied it. But as Marcus entered the space, he was struck by how tired the CEO looked, how the usual sharp energy that made Elias Ford a formidable business leader seemed somehow diminished. The past year had been challenging for Meridian Financial, with economic uncertainties forcing difficult decisions about staffing and operational costs. The weight of those decisions, Marcus realized, had left their mark on the man who had to make them. "Tell me about the girl in the lobby," Elias said without preamble, gesturing for Marcus to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "I understand she's been coming here regularly." Marcus nodded and provided a thorough briefing on Maya's daily routine, her polite but guarded responses to questions, and his growing concern about the situation. He described the careful way she chose her seat, the attention she paid to elevator arrivals and departures, the patient dignity with which she handled each day's disappointment when whoever she was waiting for failed to appear. He emphasized that the girl never caused any disruption and seemed to pose no security risk, but acknowledged that her consistent presence was unusual and potentially problematic from a liability standpoint. "She's obviously intelligent," Marcus continued, leaning forward in his chair. "Well-spoken, well-behaved, clearly comes from a good family. But there's something sad about her. Something that makes me think she's dealing with problems that are too big for a kid her age. I've tried to get her to open up about what's going on, but she just keeps saying she's waiting for someone." As he spoke, Marcus noticed that Elias listened with intense focus, occasionally asking for clarification about specific details. The CEO's interest seemed genuine rather than purely administrative, as if the situation had captured his attention on a personal level, rather than simply representing another business problem to be solved. "Have you contacted Child Protective Services?" Elias asked when Marcus finished his report. "We've considered it," Marcus replied carefully. "Patricia from reception called them twice, but they were overwhelmed with more urgent cases and said that as long as the child wasn't in immediate danger or causing problems, it wasn't a priority. The girl seems well cared for, properly dressed, not malnourished or showing signs of abuse. She's just waiting for someone." Marcus hesitated, then decided to share his personal theory about Maya's situation. "My gut tells me she's connected to this building somehow, maybe to someone who used to work here. The way she studies people's faces when they get off the elevators, the way she pays attention to announcements. It's like she's looking for someone specific, someone she expects to find here." Elias frowned, tapping his fingers against his desk in a rhythm that Marcus recognized as a sign of deep thought. The CEO's office was quiet except for the subtle hum of climate control systems and the distant sound of traffic from the street 42 floors below. Outside the windows, the city was settling into its evening rhythm, office buildings beginning to empty as workers headed home to families and responsibilities that existed beyond the world of quarterly reports and profit margins. "Any idea who she might be waiting for?" Elias asked, though something in his tone suggested he might have his own suspicions. "None that I can prove," Marcus admitted. "I've gone through our employee records, checked recent terminations, looked at contractor lists. There are a few possibilities, but nothing concrete. The girl won't give us enough information to narrow it down." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door, and Elias's temporary assistant entered with a stack of documents requiring his signature. The papers represented millions of dollars in transactions, contracts that would affect hundreds of employees and thousands of shareholders. Yet Elias found himself signing them mechanically, while his thoughts remained focused on the mystery in the lobby. As he worked through the paperwork, Marcus noticed that the CEO's attention kept drifting toward the windows, toward the view of the city below where somewhere a small girl was sitting patiently in a marble lobby, waiting for someone who might never come. There was something about Elias's distraction that suggested the situation had struck a nerve, that Maya's story had connected with something personal in the CEO's own experience. "I want to talk to her myself," Elias said suddenly, looking up from the contracts he had been signing. "Today, after my last meeting. Can you arrange that?" Marcus felt a wave of protective concern for Maya, knowing how intimidating a conversation with a powerful CEO might be for a 9-year-old child. "Sir, with respect, she's pretty shy around authority figures. Might be better if I was there too, or Patricia. Someone she's comfortable with." "Of course," Elias agreed, and Marcus was surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "We'll make sure she feels safe. I need to understand what's happening here." The request seemed to come from something deeper than corporate curiosity or legal caution. Marcus had worked security for enough high-powered executives to recognize the difference between professional interest and personal investment, and Elias Ford's concern for Maya clearly fell into the latter B category. Whatever had sparked the CEO's attention, it went beyond the normal boundaries of business responsibility. The rest of the day passed slowly for both men, each finding their thoughts returning repeatedly to the mystery in the lobby. Marcus made several trips downstairs to check on Maya, noting that she seemed more restless than usual, glancing frequently at the elevator banks and the main entrance, as if expecting someone to arrive at any moment. Her book lay unopened in her lap for long stretches, her attention focused entirely on the flow of people through the lobby. Patricia had noticed the change in Maya's behavior as well, and had taken to offering small distractions, asking her opinion about flower arrangements for the reception desk, or inviting her to help organize promotional brochures, anything to ease the visible tension in the child's small frame. Maya accepted these tasks with her usual politeness, but her heart clearly wasn't in them. Something had shifted in her routine, some internal clock or calendar that had brought new urgency to her daily vigil. At 4:15, 15 minutes before Maya's usual departure time, Elias Ford stepped off the main elevator and walked purposefully toward the corner where she sat. He had changed from his typical formal business attire into a more casual sweater and slacks, hoping to appear less intimidating. The transformation was subtle but significant, trading the armor of executive power for the more approachable uniform of someone who might actually listen to a child's concerns. Marcus and Patricia flanked him at a respectful distance, ready to intervene if the conversation became too overwhelming for their young visitor. Both had grown protective of Maya during her weeks of patient waiting, and neither wanted to see her frightened or discouraged by an encounter with authority that might end her daily visits without solving the underlying problem that had brought her to the building in the first place. Maya looked up as the group approached, her dark eyes widening slightly as she recognized the tall man with silver hair who had bumped into her that morning. She carefully placed a bookmark in her copy of Charlotte's Web and stood politely, the way her mother had taught her to greet adults, her small hands clasped in front of her worn denim jacket. The jacket had seen better days, Marcus noticed, with patches at the elbows and a carefully mended tear near the left pocket, evidence of a family that took care of their possessions but couldn't afford to replace them frequently. "Hello," Elias said, crouching down to bring himself closer to Maya's eye level. The gesture required him to balance carefully on his expensive Italian leather shoes, but he managed it gracefully, his voice taking on the gentle tone he had once used with his own daughter. "I'm Elias Ford. I work upstairs in this building, and I wanted to meet you because I've heard you've been spending a lot of time in our lobby. I was hoping we could talk for a few minutes." Maya studied his face with the serious intensity that had become her trademark over the past few weeks. She seemed to be weighing his words, evaluating his intentions, making some internal calculation about whether this conversation was safe or dangerous. Her gaze moved from Elias to Marcus to Patricia, taking comfort in the presence of the adults who had shown her kindness during her long wait. Finally, she nodded once and said, "Okay, but I can't stay long. I have to catch the bus." "That's perfectly fine," Elias assured her, settling into the chair beside hers while Marcus and Patricia positioned themselves. Nearby, the lobby around them had grown quieter as the workday wound down, with only the occasional employee heading to the parking garage or the occasional delivery person making late afternoon rounds. The change in atmosphere made their conversation feel more intimate, more personal, as if the vast marble space had somehow contracted to contain just the four of them. "I was wondering if you could tell me why you come here every day," Elias continued, his voice carefully modulated to convey genuine interest rather than interrogation. "Marcus and Patricia have been worried about you, and I'd like to help if there's something you need." Maya looked down at her hands, then back at Elias, then toward the bank of elevators that had captured so much of her attention over the past month. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but her words carried a weight that hit Elias like a physical blow. "I wanted to see where my dad used to work before he got sick." The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Elias's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. He glanced at Marcus and Patricia, seeing his own shock reflected in their faces, before turning his attention back to Maya. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, creating a picture that he suspected would be both heartbreaking and uncomfortably familiar. "Your father worked here?" he asked gently, his mind already racing through possibilities, through faces he might have forgotten, through decisions he might have made without fully understanding their consequences. Maya nodded, pulling a small, worn photograph from her backpack and holding it out for Elias to see. The image showed a man in his 30s wearing a security guard uniform, his arm around a laughing woman and a much younger version of Maya. The family looked happy in the photo, captured in a moment of joy that seemed to belong to a different world from the serious child who now sat in the marble lobby, waiting for help that might never come. The man's face was familiar, though Elias couldn't immediately place it among the hundreds of employees who had passed through Meridian's doors over the years. Security guards were part of the building's infrastructure, as essential but invisible as the heating systems or the elevator mechanics. People who performed crucial functions but rarely interacted with the executive-level staff who made the major decisions about the company's direction. His name was Raj Singh, Maya said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about her father. He worked security here for 5 years. He used to tell me stories about the important people he met, about the beautiful building where he helped keep everyone safe. He said maybe someday I could work here too, in one of the offices upstairs, if I studied hard and went to college. The name hit Elias like a sledgehammer, bringing with it a flood of memories that he had been trying to suppress for months. Raj Singh, night shift security guard, 41 years old, married with 1 daughter. Laid off 8 months ago as part of a cost-cutting initiative that had eliminated 37 positions across various departments. Elias remembered the meeting where those decisions had been made, remembered the spreadsheets that reduced human lives to numbers on a balance sheet, remembered the justifications about operational efficiency and fiscal responsibility. The layoffs had been presented as necessary for the company's survival in an increasingly competitive market. Meridian Financial had been facing pressure from shareholders to improve profit margins, and the board of directors had demanded action to reduce operational costs. The security department had been identified as an area where savings could be achieved through automation and outsourcing, with electronic monitoring systems and contracted services replacing full-time employees who had worked for the company for years. What Elias hadn't remembered until this moment was the faces behind those numbers. He hadn't thought about the families affected by those layoffs, the children who would suddenly find their worlds turned upside down by decisions made in boardrooms 40 floors above their understanding. The realization crashed over him with devastating clarity, bringing with it a wave of guilt and regret that threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. Raj Singh had been a good employee, Elias recalled now. His personnel file had contained commendations for reliability and professionalism, letters of appreciation from executives who had worked late and found comfort in his presence during long nights at the office. He had been married to the same woman for 12 years, had never missed a day of work due to personal problems, had volunteered for overtime shifts when other guards called in sick. None of that had mattered when the sprint sheets were balanced and the cost-cutting targets were set. Raj Singh had become a line item to be eliminated, a salary and benefits package that could be deleted to improve the company's quarterly performance. The human cost of that decision had been invisible to the executives who made it, hidden behind the professional distance that allowed them to make difficult choices without being overwhelmed by their personal bar. Consequences. Maya, Elias said carefully, struggling to keep his voice steady as the full scope of the situation became clear. You said your father got sick. Can you tell me what happened? Maya's grip tightened on the photograph, her knuckles white against the worn edges of the image. The question had clearly brought up painful memories, but she seemed determined to answer it, as if sharing her father's story was part of the mission that had brought her to the building in the first place. He got really sad after he lost his job, she began, her voice taking on the careful tone of a child who had been forced to understand adult problems before she was ready. Mom said it was depression, but I didn't understand what that meant at first. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped telling me stories about work. He would just sit in his chair all day, staring at the TV, but, quote, not really watching it. Each word felt like a knife twisting in Elias's chest. He thought about the reports he had signed, the cost-benefit analyses that had justified eliminating health coverage for laid-off employees after 60 days. He thought about the bonuses he had received for improving the company's profit margins, bonuses that had been built on the backs of families like Maya's. The doctor said he had a heart attack because of stress, Maya continued, her voice beginning to crack with emotion she had been holding back for weeks. They said it was because he couldn't afford his medicine anymore when he lost his health insurance. And because he was so worried about how we were going to pay for things. Mom tried to tell him it would be okay, that she could work more hours, but I think he felt like he had failed us. The clinical details of corporate policy decisions suddenly became painfully personal. Elias remembered the discussions about COBRA benefits and the decision to limit continuation coverage to 60 days rather than the industry standard of 18 months. The change had saved the company approximately $2.3 million annually, a figure that had looked impressive in budget presentations, but had never been connected to the real-world consequences for brand. Families like the Singhs. "Where is your father now?" Elias asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "He's in the hospital," Maya replied, her voice beginning to break as she spoke about her father's condition. "He's been there for 2 months. The doctors say he needs surgery to fix his heart, but we can't pay for it. And the insurance company won't cover it because they say it's a pre-existing condition. Mom works 2 jobs now, cleaning offices at night and working at a grocery store during the day. But it's not enough. She doesn't know I come here. She thinks I'm at the library after school." The full scope of the tragedy was becoming clear to Elias, and with it came a crushing sense of responsibility that he had been avoiding for months. The layoffs had been necessary, he had told himself. The company had been facing declining revenues and increased competition. Shareholders had demanded action. The board had supported his decisions. But sitting here, looking at the face of a 9-year-old girl whose world had been shattered by those decisions, all of his justifications crumbled into dust. Maya Singh was not just collateral damage from necessary business decisions. She was the daughter of a man who had served the company loyally for 5 years, who had been discarded when his position became inconvenient, who had been denied the support he needed to transition to new employment or maintain his family's health coverage. The efficiency gains and cost savings that had made Elias look like an effective leader had come at the expense of real people with real families. And the human cost of those decisions was sitting right in front of him, asking for help with the quiet dignity of a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Maya," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't suppress. "Why did you keep coming here? What were you hoping would happen?" Maya looked up at him with eyes that held far too much pain for someone so young, but also with a spark of hope that hadn't been extinguished despite weeks of disappointment. "I thought maybe if I waited long enough, someone important would notice me. Someone who could help my dad get his job back, or at least help us pay for his medicine. Mom says I'm too young to understand how the world works, but I know that important people work in tall buildings, and this is the tallest building I know." The simple logic of a child seeking help from the powerful had led Maya to spend weeks in the lobby of her father's former workplace, hoping against hope that someone would care enough to listen to her story. The faith she had shown in the fundamental goodness of people, even in the face of overwhelming circumstances, struck Elias as both heartbreaking and inspiring. Her plan had been born of desperation and childhood innocence, but it had also demonstrated a kind of courage that put most adult problem-solving to shame. While her mother worked multiple jobs and struggled with insurance companies and hospital billing departments, Maya had taken it upon herself to seek help from the only source of power she could identify. She had dressed in her best clothes, had practiced her most polite behavior, had waited patiently day after day for someone to notice her and ask the right questions. "I researched the building," Maya continued, her voice gaining strength as she explained her strategy. "I found out who the important people were, what time they usually arrived, which elevator they used. I thought if I could just talk to someone who made the big decisions, maybe they would understand that my daddy was a good worker who deserved another chance." The sophistication of her approach impressed Elias despite the pain it caused him. Maya had approached her family's crisis with the kind of systematic thinking that would have served her well in a corporate environment, identifying decision-makers, analyzing patterns of behavior, positioning herself for maximum impact. The tragedy was that she had been forced to develop these skills at age 9 in response to circumstances that should never have touched her young life. He looked at Marcus and Patricia, seeing tears in their eyes, seeing the same mixture of sadness and anger that he felt burning in his own chest. This was wrong. This was unacceptable. This was exactly the kind of situation that his wealth and power were meant to address. Yet he had been so insulated from the consequences of his business decisions that he had never even considered the human cost of his P-Chen choices. The marble lobby around them seemed to mock the conversation with its ostentatious display of wealth and success. The crystal chandeliers, the imported stone, the expensive artwork, all of it represented resources that could have been used to support families like the Singhs during difficult transitions. Instead, those resources had been devoted to creating an impressive environment for clients and visitors, a stage set designed to demonstrate the company's prosperity and stability. "Maya," he said, standing up and extending his hand to her, his decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. "I want you to come upstairs with me. I want to call your mother and tell her where you are, and then I want to talk to her about your father. There are some things I need to make right." Maya hesitated, studying his face with that same serious intensity she had shown throughout their conversation. The offer represented either the answer to her prayers or a new kind of disappointment, and her young heart had already absorbed too much pain to accept hope without careful consideration. "Are you really going to help us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Elias said, and in that moment he made a commitment that would change not only Maya's life, but his own understanding of what it meant to be a leader. "I'm going to help you. I promise." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was quiet, with Maya pressed against the back wall, clearly overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. The elevator itself was a work of art, with polished brass fixtures, mirrors that had been hand-silvered using traditional techniques, and mahogany paneling that had been harvested from sustainably managed forests in Beret, South America. The marble and brass fixtures, the soft lighting, the gentle hum of expensive machinery, all of it represented a world so far removed from her own experience that she seemed almost afraid to breathe. Maya had never been in an elevator this luxurious, had never imagined that such spaces existed outside of movies and television shows. Her own apartment building had a single elevator that worked sporadically and smelled of cleaning chemicals and old cigarettes. Nothing like this gleaming chamber that rose silently through the heart of the tower. She found herself studying her reflection in the polished surfaces, noting how small and out of place she looked among such expensive materials. Elias found himself seeing his own workplace through her eyes, recognizing for the first time how the very luxury that surrounded him daily had been built on the labor and sacrifice of people like her father. The elevator represented thousands of hours of work by skilled craftsmen, funded by profits that had been extracted from the careful management of human resources, including the decision to eliminate positions like Raj Singh's when they became inconvenient. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, Maya's eyes widened at the sight of the thick carpeting, the crystal chandeliers, and the original artwork that lined the hallways. She had imagined that important people worked in nice offices, but the reality exceeded anything her 9-year-old mind had conceived. The space felt more like a palace than a workplace, with every detail designed to convey power, wealth, and exclusivity. In his office, Elias helped Maya settle into one of the large leather chairs, while he prepared to make the most important phone call of his career. Not important because of the financial implications or strategic consequences, but important because it would determine whether a little girl would have her father back, whether a family would be saved from financial ruin, whether he could begin to atone for the unintended cruelty of decisions made in corporate boardrooms. The office itself seemed to dwarf Maya, with its soaring ceilings, expansive windows, and furniture that had been designed for adults who commanded respect and wielded influence. She sat on the edge of the massive chair, her feet dangling above the Persian rug that covered the hardwood floor, looking like a child who had wandered into a giant's castle. The contrast between her small presence and the overwhelming luxury of the space served as a stark reminder of the distance between the people who made decisions and the people who lived with their consequences. "Maya, I need your mother's phone number," Elias said gently, settling behind his desk and reaching for the phone that connected him to the outside world. "I want to talk to her about bringing your father back to work here, and about making sure he gets the medical care he needs." Maya's eyes widened with hope and disbelief. After weeks of patient waiting, after countless disappointments and unanswered prayers, the impossible seemed to be happening. "Really? You can do that?" "I can do that," Elias confirmed, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "And I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to make sure this never happens to another family if I can help it." As Maya recited her mother's phone number, her voice gaining strength with each digit, Elias felt a transformation beginning within himself. For years, he had prided himself on making tough decisions, on putting the company's interests first, on maintaining the kind of emotional distance that allowed him to function effectively in the ruthless world of corporate finance. But sitting across from Maya Singh, seeing the hope dawning in her dark eyes, he realized that true leadership wasn't about making hard choices. It was about taking responsibility for the consequences of those choices and finding ways to minimize the human cost of necessary business decisions. The phone rang twice before a tired voice answered. "Hello? Mrs. Singh? This is Elias Ford, the CEO of Meridian Financial. I'm calling about your husband Raj and about your daughter Maya, who is here with me now." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds, during which Elias could almost hear the wheels turning as Maya's mother tried to process what she was hearing. The voice that finally responded was filled with confusion and barely controlled panic. "Maya? Is she in trouble? I don't understand. What is this about? How did she get there?" "She's not in trouble, Mrs. Singh," Elias said quickly, recognizing the fear in her voice and wanting to reassure her immediately. "She's been coming to our building every day for the past month, waiting in the lobby, hoping someone would help your family. I want you to know that someone is going to help. I'm going to help." As Elias explained the situation to Maya's mother, he watched the little girl's face transform from cautious hope to joyful disbelief. He told Mrs. Singh that Raj would be reinstated as a security guard with full benefits and back pay, that the company would cover all of his medical expenses, including the surgery he needed, and that Maya would be welcome to visit the office anytime she wanted. He also mentioned that he would be reviewing the company's layoff policies to ensure that families received better support during difficult transitions. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, with Mrs. Singh alternating between tears of gratitude and disbelief that such kindness was possible. She had been working 16-hour days to try to keep her family afloat, had been making impossible choices between rent and medical bills, had been watching her husband deteriorate both physically and emotionally, while feeling powerless to help him. The phone call from Elias Ford felt like a miracle, like an answer to prayers she had been too exhausted to voice. "I don't understand," Mrs. Singh said through her tears. "Why would you do this for us? We're nobody special. Raj was just a security guard." "Mrs. Singh," Elias replied, his voice heavy with the weight of newfound understanding. "Your husband served this company faithfully for 5 years. Your daughter has shown more courage and determination in the past month than most adults show in their entire lives. You are not nobody. You are exactly the kind of family this company should be proud to support." The conversation revealed additional details about the Singh family's struggle that made Elias's guilt even more profound. Mrs. Singh had been forced to pull Maya out of her after-school program because they couldn't afford the fees. She had been skipping meals to ensure that Maya had enough to eat, had been selling her jewelry and other possessions to pay for her husband's medications, had been seriously considering declaring bankruptcy despite the shame it would bring to her family. "We never asked for charity," Mrs. Singh said with quiet dignity. "Raj was a proud man who worked hard for everything we had. When he lost his job, he just couldn't understand why. He thought he had done something wrong, that maybe he wasn't good enough. It broke his spirit before a tea. Broke his heart." The personal cost of the layoff decision became even clearer as Mrs. Singh described her husband's decline. Raj Singh had been a man who took pride in his work, who had seen his job as more than just a paycheck, but as a contribution to something larger than himself. When he was laid off, he had lost not just his income, but his sense of purpose and self-worth, leading to the depression and anxiety that had ultimately contributed to his heart attack. "I want to speak with Raj as soon as possible," Elias said. "I want to apologize to him personally, and I want to make sure he understands that his layoff was not a reflection of his performance or his value to this company. It was a business decision that I now realize was wrong." When the call ended, Elias looked at Maya, who was clutching her father's photograph against her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Is this real?" she whispered. "Is my daddy really going to be okay?" "Yes," Elias said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Your daddy is going to be okay. And Maya, I want you to know that what you did, coming here every day, never giving up hope, that took incredible courage. You saved your family by refusing to accept that no one would help." Maya launched herself from her chair and wrapped her arms around Elias in a hug that nearly knocked him over. The spontaneous display of gratitude and affection broke through the last of his emotional defenses, and he found himself hugging her back, marveling at the strength and resilience of this remarkable child who had taught him more about leadership in one afternoon than he had learned in decades of business experience. The hug lasted for several long moments, during which Elias felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of success and responsibility. The quarterly reports on his desk, the acquisition deals waiting for his approval, the board meetings and shareholder presentations that had dominated his attention for years. All of it suddenly seemed less important than the small girl in his arms who had reminded him that real leadership meant taking care of people, not just profits. As word of Maya's story spread through the Meridian building over the following days, it sparked a transformation that went far beyond one family's rescue. Employees who had been laid off during the cost-cutting measures began receiving calls about new positions. The company established a hardship fund to help families facing medical emergencies. Exit interviews became more comprehensive, with genuine efforts to provide support and resources for departing employees. Marcus Webb, who had been watching over Maya for weeks, volunteered to personally oversee Raj Singh's transition back to work, ensuring that he received the support and understanding he needed as he recovered from his illness. Marcus had worked with enough people dealing with depression and anxiety to understand that Raj would need time and patience to rebuild his confidence and sense of purpose. Patricia organized a welcome-back celebration for Raj and arranged for Maya to have a proper tour of the building, including a visit to the executive floor where she could see the offices she had dreamed of working in someday. The tour included stops at the legal department, the accounting offices, and the marketing division, with employees taking time to explain their roles and encourage Maya's academic aspirations. The story of Maya's month-long vigil also reached the local media, though Elias was careful to control the narrative to protect the family's privacy while using the attention to highlight the importance of corporate responsibility. The coverage led to inquiries from other companies about Meridian's new policies regarding layoffs and employee support, creating industry-wide discussions about the human cost of business decisions. 3 months later, Raj Singh returned to his position as a night shift security guard, his health restored and his spirit renewed by the knowledge that his daughter's faith in the goodness of people had been justified. The surgery had been successful, and his cardiologist was optimistic about his long-term prognosis. More importantly, the depression that had nearly destroyed him had lifted as he regained his sense of purpose and his family's financial security. Maya continued to visit the building occasionally, but now she came as a guest rather than a supplicant, welcomed by everyone from the maintenance staff to the executive team. She had her own security badge that allowed her access to the lobby and the first floor conference rooms, where she sometimes did her homework while waiting for her father's shift to end. The corner chair where Maya had maintained her vigil became something of a shrine within the building, not in a morbid sense, but as a reminder of the importance of paying attention to those who might otherwise go unnoticed. Employees would sometimes sit in that chair during their breaks, reflecting on the courage it had taken for a 9-year-old girl to seek help from the most powerful people she could find. On the anniversary of Maya's first visit to the lobby, Elias Ford established the Raj Singh Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting families affected by corporate layoffs and economic hardship. The foundation provided medical assistance, job placement services, and educational scholarships, ensuring that no child would have to sit alone in a corporate lobby, hoping for someone to notice their pain. The foundation's headquarters occupied an entire floor of the Meridian building, with a staff of social workers, counselors, and job placement specialists who worked to help families navigate the challenges of unemployment and economic uncertainty. The organization partnered with hospitals to provide emergency medical care, with schools to support children whose educations had been disrupted by family financial crises, and with other corporations to develop more humane approaches to workforce management. Raj Singh, now 10 years old and thriving in school, often spoke at foundation events, sharing her story with audiences of business leaders and community members. Her message was simple but powerful. Behind every business decision are real people with real families, and true success can only be measured by how well we take care of each other. Her presentations were remarkably sophisticated for someone her age, demonstrating the intelligence and maturity that had made her month-long lobby vigil possible. She spoke about the importance of hope in the face of overwhelming challenges, about the courage required to ask for help when you need it most, and about the responsibility that comes with power and privilege. Adults sometimes forget that children are watching, Maya would tell her audiences, her voice clear and strong despite her small stature. They think we don't understand what's happening when families are struggling, but we do understand. We understand that someone somewhere made a decision that changed our lives, and we hope that someone will care enough to help when things go wrong. The little girl who had kept showing up at the office had indeed changed everything, not through demands or protests, but through the quiet persistence of hope and the unwavering belief that someone, somewhere, would care enough to help. Her story became a reminder that leadership isn't just about making profitable decisions, but about taking responsibility for the human impact of those decisions and finding ways to build a better world for everyone. Elias Ford, who had once measured his success in quarterly earnings and stock prices, now measured it in the smiles of families who had been given second chances, in the tears of gratitude from parents who could afford their children's medicine, in the hope that shone in the eyes of a little girl who had taught him that true power lies not in the ability to make difficult decisions, but in the courage to make them right. The transformation in Elias's leadership style extended beyond the foundation and into every aspect of Meridian Financial's operations. Board meetings now included discussions about employee welfare alongside profit projections. Shareholder reports highlighted the company's community investments as proudly as they announced revenue growth. Corporate policies were reviewed not just for their financial impact, but for their effects on real families and real lives. The company's approach to layoffs was completely overhauled, with new requirements for extended severance packages, continued health coverage, job placement assistance, and regular check-ins with affected families. No employee would be terminated without a comprehensive review of alternatives, and no family would be left to navigate the aftermath alone. These changes initially met with resistance from some board members and shareholders who worried about the impact on profitability. But Elias was able to demonstrate that the company's improved reputation and employee loyalty actually enhanced its long-term financial performance. Meridian Financial became known as an employer of choice, attracting top talent who wanted to work for an organization that valued people alongside profits. The marble lobby of Meridian Financial Tower still bustled with activity each morning, filled with the energy and ambition of people building their careers and pursuing their dreams. But now it also served as a reminder of the importance of paying attention to those who might otherwise go unnoticed, of listening to the quiet voices that often carry the most important messages, and of never forgetting that behind every corporate policy and business decision are real people whose lives hang in the balance. Maya Singh's corner chair remained in the lobby, not as a memorial to hardship, but as a symbol of hope, perseverance, and the transformative power of one person's refusal to give up on the belief that good things can happen when we care enough to make them happen. And every morning, as employees hurried past that chair on their way to important meetings and crucial deadlines, they were reminded of the little girl who had kept showing up until someone finally asked her why, and whose answer had changed everything. The legacy of Maya's courage extended far beyond the walls of Meridian Financial, inspiring other companies to examine their own policies and practices. The Maya Singh Foundation partnered with business schools to develop curricula that emphasized corporate social responsibility and ethical leadership. Case studies based on Maya's story became standard reading in management programs, teaching future executives about the importance of considering the human impact of business decisions. Years later, when Maya graduated from high school as valedictorian and received a full scholarship to study business administration, she would often reflect on that month she spent in the marble lobby, waiting for someone to notice her and ask the right questions. The experience had taught her that change was possible, that people in positions of power could be moved by compassion and conscience, and that sometimes the smallest voices could speak the loudest truths. As she prepared to enter college, and eventually the business world herself, Maya carried with her the lessons she had learned from her father's dedication to service, her mother's resilience in the face of adversity, and her own discovery that courage sometimes meant simply showing up day after day, until someone finally asked why. The little girl who had once sat patiently in a corporate lobby had grown into a young woman determined to use her voice and her talents to ensure that no other family would have to face alone the kind of crisis that had nearly destroyed her own. The story of Maya Singh became more than just a tale of one family's struggle and salvation. It became a testament to the power of persistent hope, the importance of corporate conscience, and the extraordinary things that can happen when we remember that behind every number on a spreadsheet is a human being whose life matters, whose family deserves protection, and whose courage can change the world in ways we never imagined possible.